Hello everyone, I am Reverend Gartlyn Chance, pastor of the Holistic Transformation Ministries at Louis. This is a branch work of the Calvary Road Deliverance Tabernacle under the umbrella of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the West Indies. I am also a special education teacher, having taught for 34 years of my life. Bridging the Gaps will be aired on the Tobago Inspirational Network every Saturday at 8 p.m. The program is expected to keep you at the edge of your seat. Join us as we deal with issues relating to the stages of early childhood to adolescence. Good evening, viewers. I am Gartlyn Chance, host of the program Bridging the Gap. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be with you again, to do something that I like to do most. Today with me again is beautiful Joy McPherson, school psychologist, woman of God, bubbly, effervescence, has something to say that you will always want to hear. I thank you for tuning in. Invite somebody to come look at the program as we go forward. Joy, it's a pleasure to have you again.
And always, it's a pleasure to be with you.
We have a good time together,
Yes.
don't we?
Yes, we do.
Right, today, viewers, we want to look at the characteristics of generations. We are bridging the gap still, and we will continue to bridge the gap throughout this program. So we want to look at generations, and we're looking at generations from the perspective of Dr. Jill Novak, because there are different perspectives. So we are looking at what he said concerning generations. I think he gave about 7 different generations, and as we said in our previous programs, these will be people who were born at a particular time. So they share collective experiences.
That's right.
They have a collective, help me, Joy.
There's a collective history that they share.
Right, and that is something that connects them, right? So we're looking at generation, the first generation that Novak speaks about is the GI generation, or the government issues generation.
That was in the time of the World
These
War.
would be the people in the time of the
World War
war. Tell us something about it.
Well, those, again, I like the, for most persons, I like to do that, those little research and see what they talk about. And he talked about the World War II. There were so many things happening at that point around the world that people had to respond to. And what is nice about when you do these sorts of research is that you find that what happens across the world affects us, even in this small part of the cosmos, as they call it, right? Even as small as Tobago is, we had a lot of people. I had family that went away and fought in the war. But there were issues across the world, because now we were trying to, there were bodies trying to form those governments, showing their strength, as a matter of fact. And that's where we had that generation being born, that GI generation.
Joy, I'm the 9th of 9 children. I'm the last of 9 children. I remember when I was going to Bishops, the children, when Daddy come on the evenings, and the children will run and say, Gartlyn, your grandfather outside. Because they thought he was too old to be my father. So I had some connection with that generation because my father was born in 1920. Okay. My mother later came in 1930. Okay. So I had the experience of those 2 generations. It is indeed a privilege it is a
people
privilege.
don't really fully understand when we benefit from having persons.
So I had experiences with that generation who knew about teamwork. Because of their experiences during the Depression period, the World Wars and the Depression period, they had to team together in order to survive. So they know about teamwork. These are the people who build the nations. If we look at the US, these are the people who worked hard
at that point in time.
These people are community-minded. Now we're looking at this because we want to see the progression of the generation. Right, so we're starting with,
there.
For example, Bob Hope. Let me just call his name now.
For those who know, Bob Hope.
That's my father, right? So these people are people who are interested in morality.
Yes.
They were, you know, near absolute standards.
Yes.
There was a clear cut between what is right
and what was wrong.
And what is wrong. And because they were in that period when there was the war, they're very patriotic.
Yes.
So those are the people who don't make joke where voting is concerned.
Suffrage, adult suffrage, yes.
That's it. Yes, they didn't make joke with that. You didn't have to force them to vote. They were the people who would be married for life. That was a value that they had. I am married for life. Divorce and children out of wedlock was unacceptable. In fact, we have heard of stories of persons who, when they were teaching and somebody got pregnant, they had to quickly and quietly bow out of the profession because it was not accepted.
That's right.
They had strong loyalties to their job and church and the group setting and that kind of thing. But one of the things we know with those people, they very, very, especially even those before Daddy from around 1901, when I studied it, there was no retirement.
You work.
They worked and worked and worked until they were unable to work. And in fact, at that time, no union.
No union. So you just had to make it. You just had to
no
work
advocate.
to make it. No, you had to work to make it. Yes.
That's it. This was the generation that would use it, fix it, make it do, or do without. Right?
Yeah, those are some good principles.
Of course.
There's some good principles.
And those are some things that as a generation, even following, we learn from them. They were not the ones who would go to courts to do higher purchasing. They avoided debt.
Either you buy it, or if you couldn't, you do without it.
I save and buy cash.
Yeah.
I save and buy cash.
You know, you're talking about that. What I'm seeing there in that generation was a lot of pride. A lot of
pride. In the positive sense.
Positive. Not being proud.
Yeah.
But full of pride.
That generation was the generation that didn't know much about planes and radio and the airplane, that is, and TV, and you know, they didn't have refrigerators and electricity. In fact, I heard my parents talk about dove in meat.
Yep.
And sometimes I wonder,
how
did the meat last? Because today, if you buy meat and you leave it out for a few minutes, it starts to taint.
Progression we're talking about here? Yes, we
right?
Things were different.
Now that GI generation, or the government issue generation, is referred to as the greatest generation that existed. They were very resilient.
That's true.
They set the standards and the foundation for the generations which followed. Right? And then there is another generation, according to Novak, the mature, the silent generation. What do you know about that?
Well, I'm not the expert on it, and my little reading about them, it seemed at that point in time, after the war would have finished, and as you would have explained, people were working. So during that time, it was, and as you said, probably some countries had some unions and stuff, but that's what people did. They worked. Their intention was to just work, settle. Because I think too, when you look at it, there was so much upheaval around the world during the war. Now that the war was over, we had this generation of people who, even though they may have had concerns, the major things they did was to settle and work. So there was not the set of uprisings that you might have seen and all of that. And I'm just taking it from that angle. But there are some other traits that persons in the silent generation would have. But that would have set the scene for the silent generation.
Yeah, and you mentioned work, but who worked? Not many women worked.
No.
Well, at that time, I
think at that point in time, too, you would have had that segregation of labor.
Yeah.
I think that
women were supposed to be
the homemakers and that
but
kind of
they were accepted in areas like teaching and nursing.
There were specific areas of
or secretarial jobs, and the men were loyal.
Yes.
To their jobs, they were loyal. I think it was around this time to where, because of what happened during the war and you know, people's minds, you know,
they were of a particular mindset. Because I remember, as we mentioned with the GI generation, remember it was also for persons setting their territories. So now that was done. I'm now supposed to go back and make a life.
Yes. This is a generation too that did a lot of reading of the newspapers, because they wanted to know what was happening. They needed information. You know, so they were not as savvy as well. They didn't have computers.
They didn't have
anyway,
it then. No.
But they wanted to know what was happening across
the world.
Across the world, because of how it impacted their lives. One of the things that made me laugh is that when I looked at it, when I studied it, they said that one of the greatest complaints that teachers would have would be children who would pass notes to each other.
All right.
Or chewing gum in class. They didn't have problems with defiance and guns and these kind of things.
Their problems were very simple.
Their problems very, very simple. So they were a disciplined generation and self-sacrificing. They were very cautious because of what the previous generation
would have experienced. Yes. They would have learned.
And then we had the baby boomers.
You know, you always hear this.
I thought I was part of that generation, but Novak didn't say it.
I think based on Novak, probably not.
Yes.
But different theorists will say the period is different. So you probably at some point would have fallen as a baby boomer. And we always hear that term. And as I said, again, my research looking at the baby boomers, they said they were one of the most active of any of the generations. They looked at being physically fit. They talk about getting wealthy. There were things that they fought for, that they wanted, and thought of themselves as one of the greatest generations as well. I think too, it was at this point they were sort of benefiting from what would have happened before. I think that is where they fit in as baby boomers, and they ran with it. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of
it is said that this was one of the largest generation.
The gap was very wide.
It's one of the largest. This was the first TV generation, first divorce generation, first acceptance of divorce generation, first emergence and a little coming out of homosexuality.
That's where it
and that kind of thing. So this seemed to be the generation that started to topple things,
shift things
over
around
a little. This is the generation that would have possibly known a little about the computer just emerging.
I think the first.
We don't want to give wrong information here.
And it could, and I urge, especially if you read, but we want to be as accurate as possible. But you probably would have had just the first inkling of the experimental uses of the computer. Right, because it was around. Trust me, viewers, the computers were around for a very long time. We didn't always have access to it, but the research was being done.
It is said that this is the generation that brought in this bite now. You want it bite now, and use credit to get it if you don't have. If you do not have the money to do it. This was the self-righteous and self-centered generation.
They said it was a time when people felt entitled.
That's it.
Entitled.
Because of what previous generations had experienced. And people like me, I remember telling my father at one time, you know, you're being very determined. But this is what I want to do, Daddy. And if you come in the way, I will never forget you for it. That's the generation.
Let's remember 9th of 9 children, huh?
The 9th of 9 children.
Yes.
They always told me that they didn't expect to have another child. And he said I was the best mistake that he made, but I know he didn't use the exact words, but I know that I challenged them. And then we have the next generation, the Generation X. Right. Tell me about the Generation X.
The Generation X. Now, they came around the mid-60s into the early 80s. I could probably say I fell into that generation, but that's okay.
Sure, it's from 65.
For some, from between mid-65 to early 80s.
So you were a little lower.
Yeah.
Don't try to get into my
down in the midway there. But
yes.
the thing is with this generation, again, they had a level of entitlement, and I think I think they were looked at as inheritance of what happened between the baby boomers years. And they would have also gotten that first inkling of some of the newer technologies coming in, right? The importance, and not just using it, but just the importance of and how it was used, that global effect for generations, for the Generation X, right? And I think in that, globally, we had that global influence. So it was, and if you used to look at the television at those days, it was the hippies, it was the influence of the drugs, there was a drug culture, there was a love, peace, and happiness kind of culture in the mid-60s kind of thing. And that influenced a lot of how the Generation X thought about things.
I remember my father, that's the GI generation, looking at us and saying things like, I don't know what happened to this generation. Is what kind of music are you listening to?
True.
Suppose you were alive today and here
what's
3-year-olds singing and looking at YouTube on the computer and that kind of thing. But I want us to go quickly to the last
to the last
the Generation Y. That's the Millennium Generation.
And again, you know, as you would have explained before, different perspectives show different age, the range. And I know we would have looked at it and looked at some of them between, I think it was 81 to 2000, right. Some of them look at 81 to 1996 area.
It differ a little.
Right. But the thing is with this generation is that they, and I liked how Novak looked at it. They were looked at as nurtured by omnipresent parents, optimistic and focused. Parents were there. Right? The parents were there.
Scheduling everything.
Exactly. Because I think at this point in time, there was that, even though it was there, and we know about the importance of education, I think parents at this point in time of these children pushed education and wanted to ensure that at least their children had that. There was a respect for authority. Based on, and this would have been US based, I think, right? So they were looking at falling crime rates according,
well, remember they said when they sneeze in the US, we catch the cold.
So it's right here. But what I liked about this, they said they were falling teen pregnancy rates. And again, let me just skip back to that Generation X, love, peace, and happiness in the 60s, where there was a lot of liberalism. So even having children, teenagers getting pregnant, again, you would have had that drug culture that would have influenced a lot of it. A lot of it would have been done. But in the Generation Y, you had falling teen pregnancy rates, you had falling crime rates, again, because of that continual, I think, oversight. But then we had problems with school safety. And I remember in my line of study, everything that pertains to school safety, and again, I'm just skipping to the US here, was based on 1999 in Columbine. That was one of the first major shootings. And I think when you look at it, it's the safety of schools. And I mean, we can look at it today, the way how we have our schools. We're seeing that issue, some of those issues. They schedule everything. The world is not a safe place. We've seen that based on some of the things that would have gone on. Because remember, we were no longer in the war. But we grew up as children hearing about the war in the Middle East, Iran and Iraq.
Yes.
Over on the Falkland Islands.
Yes.
I remember as a child wondering, will this war meet to us? Because it seemed
we read
like
about it in the Bible.
Right.
Rumors of wars and rumors.
And it was like it was always ongoing. But again, we always have to look at some of the positive things. The fact that with the digital literacy, they began to get more on corral with the computer, how to use it. Some of the things that it could do, they said that they prefer to work in teams, which I think is always a good thing.
Yes.
Not just depending on yourself, but you know, the cooperation. They envision the world as a 24/7 place. They want it now. Right? They talk about that. We would have jokes about it with the food. Your food must go into the microwave and it should be finished in an instant. We talk about, they've been told over and over that, and I love this, that they're special. Now, we talk about children. Now, this program is about children. And we talk about ensuring children that they know they're loved and they're seen. And that's what God has for them. You know, that love, even as we, at the arrow, we're going back to the arrow and the archer, but they're secured. Because as an archer, you can't have your arrows all over the place. Your arrows have to be in your
because
quiver.
The arrow could turn around and stick you.
Right. So we talk about they were taught that it was special. And the thing is, as we read here before, they were nurtured by omnipresent parents. Now, parents would say you're special. Now, they're expecting everybody else around them to treat them that way. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works.
That's it.
All right.
They think that the world owed them
something.
To
treat them that way.
And they go ahead, let me hear you.
And they say they do not live to work, but prefer a more relaxed work environment. I think we all do that today. But what
with hand-holding.
But that's the thing, a lot of hand-holding, spoon-feeding. And I think that's when it began.
And these are some of those that we meet in the schools.
We inherit. That's what we've inherited.
Right? And it is so important that we understand the progression and that we keep very close to these people. Okay, that we connect with them so that we could help to make lovingly, bring them back into line by guiding.
There's some things. I think each generation has had its own pros and cons. And like with everything you do, you take away the positive. When you're in the house of the Lord and the word comes, you filter it. You filter it and you see what pertains to you.
It's like a mirror.
Same thing. So it's the same thing that you do. Whatever this generation has to offer, because we're not just talking here about the people born in this generation, but we're talking about what they bring to the generation. So therefore, even though we may have been born in a different generation, we still now have to interact with these young people.
In order to
so
fulfill
we have
God's
to see
purpose.
what they bring to the table.
That's it.
So I'm thinking too, some of the things that they're bringing to us will be both positive and negative. So we have to learn how to filter what they have.
That's it. And one of the things that we noticed, even when we started from the GI generation, which was those in the 1901 to the 1920s, every generation that followed didn't seem to be able to cope well with the previous generation. It seemed as if every other generation will look back and say, but what kind of foolishness they're doing? We can't deal with them. And now we have and you just did the Y generation, we have the Generation Z.
Lord, the Generation
and
Z.
we have, this is the generation, my granddaughter with her cell phone, 3 years and 2 years. Granny, you do YouTube on your phone, and these children are the ones that, everything for them is about phone.
Right.
In fact, it is said that they're not concerned about, they have eco-fatigue.
Yes.
They're tired with hearing about the environment and the many ways we have to save it. That does not concern them.
this generation,
they are concerned about the computer. Go ahead.
The Generation Z or the post-millennial generation
the
were born,
boomlets.
yes, mid-90s into the mid-2000s.
Yeah,
and again, it's
now.
Right.
Yeah.
But what was defining in this generation was 9/11.
Yeah, yeah.
That defined this generation. And so we talk about the safety aspect. We talk about all the things going on in the world at around that time. But now we talk about, most have a DVD player, a video game, the phone. My own at home will tell me I want Peppa Pig or Ryan.
Television in the rooms.
Which, unfortunately, parents, I really do not approve of that. That's just my disclaimer. We have to know what our children are listening to, right? The eco-fatigue you mentioned. With the advent of computers, we have web-based learning. And that has worked for our children because now we can use that. And even in future programs, and you're going to talk, when you talk a little bit more about education, we'll see how we could, the computers have improved.
So we could use it more efficiently.
Right.
Yeah, because you have positive.
Yeah. Right. And then there's one that you brought to my attention.
The
KGOY.
Theory.
Parents, tech savvy, kids growing older, younger. And in that, as you mentioned, your 3-year-old or 3-year-olds have tablets and phones. They're not playing with dolls anymore.
Of course. These children don't want dolls. What do you want as a gift? I remember asking my niece, write down some things that you would like to get for Christmas.
Everything
they want,
electronic.
what's that little square thing? The little square computer thing.
With the game,
Come, I just forget it. The tablet. I want a tablet. I want a cell phone. I want a... They're not saying dolls anymore. And it is notable that it was said by Novak that even the company that made Barbie dolls,
they're suffering.
They suffered. There was an economic decline because the age that was using the Barbie dolls.
Yes. It's no longer, it's now low.
8-year-olds and 10-year-olds.
And you know,
no
sometimes it's kind of fun to look at these traits. And I encourage parents, especially if you're tech savvy like your children, use the computer. Go on the computer, look and see what your children are doing, because it's now going to inform you. Because again, we're talking here, this program is about bridging the gaps.
Yes.
And you have to know what they're playing, what they're listening to, what they're doing on the phone, on the tablets.
Yes.
That is in order to inform you how to best parents. But there's something that before I know, and we're running out of time, and we'll be back again to talk more about the gaps. But we look at these children are seen as rude and careless, but it's what they're around, what's around them.
Yeah. With joy, we need time. We need time. One of the things that I'm looking at with this generation, the Y and the Z generation, the information age,
that's available.
the amount of information that these children are exposed to. If the archer doesn't help to manage the use of these gadgets, they are now being exposed to information that they are not developed to deal with. One of the things that we have to remember is the work of myelin in the lives of these children.
Yes.
Right? The brain is not yet developed, and remember, the higher order skills are in the front of the brain, and that's the last area that is developed. So when these children have all these, and I remember recently with the DSM-5.
Yes.
Is it the DSM-5?
Yes, the DSM-5 is not
right. They said that they pushed it from 25 to I think it was about 30.
Yeah.
Right? So they're not developed until 30. We have work to do, viewers. We have work to do with our charges, with our arrows. We looked at the progression of the generations, and you saw where it came from, the GI generation right down to the Generation Z. We cannot allow these children to develop on their own. They will self-destruct, and in destroying themselves, they will destroy us. So we need to come back to the place where we understand our roles as archers. That's God's divine design. I thank you for listening. It was a pleasure discussing and being with you. We ran out of time. May God richly bless you, and we look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Hello everyone, I am Reverend Gartlyn Chance, pastor of the Holistic Transformation Ministries at Louis. This is a branch work of the Calvary Road Deliverance Tabernacle under the umbrella of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the West Indies. I am also a special education teacher, having taught for 34 years of my life. Bridging the Gaps will be aired on the Tobago Inspirational Network every Saturday at 8 p.m. The program is expected to keep you at the edge of your seat. Join us as we deal with issues relating to the stages of early childhood to adolescence.